Welcome to the Parable Arrows podcast, where we wrestle with story to seek deeper truth. We believe that engaging with the art of the world can help us discern more of what God, as the true artist, is trying to reveal in the beauty of his story. Join us as we discuss movies, ideas, and practice engaging with art, God's word, our thoughts, and each other. Hey everyone, today our discussion is on the movie Lars and the Real Girl, starring Ryan Gosling, Emily Mortimer, Paul Schneider, and Patricia Clarkson. I'm one of your hosts, Femi, and I'm joined by my most indubitably decked out co-host, Mr. Josh Cook. How's it going, Josh?
Dude, I got all the Attack on Titan swag behind me. I just walked out of the series finale. I'm hyped up. I wish we could talk about that, but we're here for Lars. We're going to talk about Lars today, so I'm ready to go.
Cool. Similarly, I'm doing well. God's good. Got to watch this movie with my wife, since we don't always watch the movies together. And then I put this in the notes, but I wanted to pay tribute to the Hornsby family in Middle Tennessee. People who know, they know. The people who don't, I just wanted to say that my thoughts and prayers have been with them for the last couple of weeks. Yeah. And we'll just leave it there to honor some people. But otherwise, happy to dig into this one. So, yeah. Let's get into it. This movie was selected by one of our friends, Nicia, who's in Texas, and we're serious that we'll try to, if you are a listener and you suggest movies to us, email us. We'll try to get more speed under our belt so we can get through more episodes. We'll try not to just have billions of thoughts about these, but this movie covers a lot of topics like loss, abandonment, and it's full of lessons about caring. And so for new listeners, we use sort of a breakdown to walk through with all of our listeners how we're thinking through this. It's called SMART. So we're going to go through the summary, message, the audience. We'll rethink some of the things we saw, and then we'll do a touch of theology in the end. So let's get into it. Okay. So summary, let's tell you what happened. A little bit of a spoiler alert. But Lars, the main character in the movie, lives in a garage on a property owned by his brother and his brother's wife while working a typical cubicle job. They are located somewhere in Wisconsin. They lived there since the passing of their father. Their mother died while giving birth to Lars. Gus's wife and Lars' sister-in-law, Karen, consistently tries to get him to come out of his shell, and Lars is sort of socially awkward, and they don't know why. He has a fear of touching. I think it's called hapaphobia or haphophobia, and fear of touching and being touched. So even when a coworker and one of his fellow church attenders, Margot, gives subtle advances, Lars can't be bothered. At his job, his cubicle mate introduces him to real dolls, which are life-size sex dolls. And Lars actually buys one a few weeks later, naming her Bianca and treating her like a real-life girlfriend. After initial disbelief, the doctor, Gus, and Karen convince the town to go along with this charade to show some care for Lars. Lars slowly comes to see the truth about the people that he thought wouldn't care, and the fact that they care so much, they're willing to even take care of this delusion. He slowly breaks down the delusion by having a medical emergency and fatal diagnosis for Bianca, who we as the audience and everybody else in the town knows as a doll. But the town shows up for Lars for her funeral, and at the funeral, the movie closes with Lars asking Margot afterwards if she'd like to take a walk. So that's it. All right, let's get into message, audience, and rethink. So Josh, what did you think the message of this movie is?
Yeah, dude, so funny enough, I also watched this movie with my wife and my grandma. So the three of us were watching this movie. Oh, no,
that's awesome.
Yeah, so it was awesome. So it was really good. So I know Gloria's really excited to sit and listen because she's like, oh, I've actually seen this movie this time, so I can have opinions on it. But we were both blown away by how many things we thought the movie was touching on. And this message kind of connects to I think the question I want to talk most about, or I'm excited to talk about, is the power of community to love someone through that person's unhealthy coping with their pain. And so without a judgment on Lars, he, as the movie unfolds, we learn all the trauma that has influenced him turning to something like using a sex doll and Bianca as like a delusional act to deal with traumas of losing his mom and probably even, an unhealthy father figure after losing his wife and, maybe some stuff that happened. And so to me, the power of the community knowing that and still embracing him through the midst of how he was coping with his trauma and trying to buy into like, okay, the doctor said this is a solution for him and this will help. So like, all right, here we go. We're gonna take the doll to the barber or to the hair salon and sign her up for all these like PTA meetings and things like that. So yeah, just the power of community coming together to help someone who's really struggling with something. How about you?
Yeah, I for 100% with that. I do not think people understand the power of community or a community to heal somebody, to help them. The other one that I walked away with is sort of a turning point that I felt the movie was trying to elicit, which was when Lars started to think about all the people who cared about him through their care for this doll that he's brought into their lives, that they didn't reject or immediately just throw him to the side. For many people who are going through really hard times, the more isolated they feel, which is one of the things PA is trying to help people be able to communicate through. When you feel that isolated, it's hard to see all the things that people around you are doing to just maintain the floor you're standing on. It feels like you're sinking, but there are spouses, friends, girlfriends, boyfriends, community members, people who are there ready to reach out, and they're all dealing with their own stuff, but you don't realize it until you go, like, what would I do without this person or these people who I get to see? And I think we saw that a lot. We're filming this and recording it in 2023, but we saw that a lot in 2020 with people realizing how much they needed to feel whole when there was mandated or highly suggested separation from others. How uneasy that really made people feel. And so I think that was one of the other things I thought. I don't know, what do you think? You agree with that or feel with that?
No, I agree. I'm just excited. Let's get trucking. Let's dive into this audience and rethink.
Let's move to audience. And in audience, I think this will be a really quick section. But who do you think should watch the movie?
For sure. So I think families with kids is one of our groups we usually say. I would say definitely if it's family with older kids, I think there's a lot of pathways for parents and youth to talk about unhealthy coping skills, specifically like some ones that we'll probably touch on during the rethink are like pornography usage, phone usage, any other modern day means of escapism to avoid discomfort. I think this would actually be a movie where, you could be like, okay, switch out Bianca. What's that thing that you're going to not deal with your problems and stuff like that? So I think it's a really easy like exchange visual image from the film. And then friends and evangelistically, like definitely, I think to me it's really interesting too that there is a church community represented in this film, and the church community has a scene with a bunch of elders or whoever sitting in a circle with Lars's brother and sister-in-law, and they're like, we're not going to go along with this. And one of them's like, oh, your kid does this and this kid does this and like whatever, everyone's dealing with their own stuff. Like, we love Lars, we'll make it happen. And to me, I think evangelistically, I would argue that there's a lot of this movie. We'll talk later about, whether or not you should buy into someone else's delusion and stuff like that, and some of the things. But I think evangelistically, if I were to tell someone what the church could look like and what it could do, this is a really beautiful example of why Christ loved the church so deeply, is because there's this profound love that pours out from not just one, not just two, not just five, not just 10, but a whole town's worth of people trying to help this one singular person. So,
I would completely agree. I think that for us, understanding how to swap out Bianca for ourselves is absolutely critical, as well as what you said about looking at other people in our lives and seeing what are their Biancas, what are the things they're doing that are unhealthy coping mechanisms, and the things that they might be hiding that we can say, hey, I don't know what's going on here. Almost like, your kid's a superhero or something, but like, hey, I don't know what's going on. You're not showing up a lot. Something's off. Just letting you know that if you have this unhealthy coping mechanism, or if you're just trying to plan a surprise party for me. These are things that I want to make sure you understand about me and my willingness to care for you. And if you need me, how I will move things around in my life to make sure that I can be there for you. I think that it is a really beautiful way to think about the church and for us to challenge ourselves with. This is a small town in Wisconsin. I think they're focusing on. I was looking at the license plates.
Really? Oh, I didn't even catch that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I was looking, man, not being from Wisconsin originally, I'll like look at that plate and be like, yo, wait, I've seen that before. And I think that with the population and sizes, there's different things that happen, but it was really sort of beautiful to see a film version of everybody just going, you know, like, we'll make it work.
Yeah.
So it's cool. Great audience thing. All right, let's get into the rethink. We've been looking at these. We have some notes down, but there's a question that you added that I think you got some meat behind. So I wanted to make sure we hit on that one first.
Okay.
So I will let you take on that one, and then we can hop into some of the other ones because there's so much to talk about.
Yeah, dude. I think of all the movies we've talked about, probably in the last like couple episodes, I think this is one that I think is probably the most approachable from a like visual imagery and metaphor standpoint, and kind of practicing. Like if you're someone where, you know, you've heard our conversations about Toy Story and you're like, how is this movie about identity or whatever? Lars and the Real Girl is actually a really great example to see. Like it's a more simplified story, but it's got the same kind of symbolism and metaphor, and, you know, Bianca representing escapism and Lars being someone struggling with trauma, and the church and family trying to figure out how to help and where that all leads. So my question was, as some backstory, so Femi and I met through High Point Church in Madison, Wisconsin. Shout out High Point. And I think one of our first conversations we ever had, actually extended, was about pop culture, was in the lobby after a Forgiven and Free meeting, which is a group of men who get together to just kind of like learn about the depths of our hearts and to grow out of struggles of lust or any sort of thing that spawns that. So if that's pornography usage or whatever. In that group was the first time I was ever challenged with the idea that for so much of my life as a young man, and having, you know, been exposed to pornography when I was probably like 12 or 13, maybe. Yeah, I was like that age, through my own, you know, just being like, oh, I don't know about these things, and the internet exists and stuff like that.
12,
and so
12 is like that.
For most of my life up until that time at High Point, which I was in my mid to late 20s, so we're talking like almost a decade, a little mid-decade and a half, I was framed that something like that was just general male lust. Like, you're just always going to have this thing. Like, sorry, sucks. It's, you know, it's the male struggle. But instead, one of the things I was super appreciative about Forgiven and Free is that we focused on how going to something, whether it was fantasizing in your mind and thinking about really unhealthy things, whether it was using pornography or whatever, that was a form of escape from something. And over time, I've realized with myself and conversations with men in the group or other friends, you know, here in Milwaukee, that men are often, so speaking as men, we're trying to escape from deep-seated and painful emotions. So the question I wanted to talk through is, I feel like the thing I've been hearing from a lot of church leaders, or just, you know, even we're seeing this in secular culture now, or we'll say non-religious culture, that there's more and more people saying how destructive something like pornography is. So there's a lot of people who are in agreement, and they're like, yeah, this is bad and it's not good for your brain. And, you know, so we agree on that front. But there's not a deep desire in the heart to be like, okay, but why am I going to this thing continually? And how do I turn this into a heart change, not just a habit change? And so my question would, in a community, so thinking of Lars and the Real Girl, so how should we, whether that's a group of friends, a church, coworkers, family members, whatever, how should a community handle unhealthy ways of coping with pain? And so when should we take drastic measures like the town does in the film? And are there times that it's justified to maybe get a little bit more lovingly stern, the way Karen does with Lars outside after, you know, Lars is saying like, no one cares about me? Or is there a level where, you know, I know in the New Testament, sometimes Paul talks about not being associated with the wicked brother. And I don't think that means that if anyone sins or struggles with any sort of sin, that you just cut them out. You know, you lied once, get out of here, you're done. But there is a level of, okay, but if you're pursuing this continually and you're not changing, like, how do we handle that as a community? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Yeah, the passage you just mentioned with Matthew 18 talks about church discipline and unrepentant. Like, so if somebody continues to engage in unrepentant, so there's something about the heart position there. If someone's falling into it, I think that this is going to be a two-sided answer that people might not like. When someone is dealing with a consistent pain or struggle that is seemingly insurmountable, the two ways that I have seen people really get out of it is one, a very, very direct confrontation with the gospel and a challenge into who the person truly is. It's really hard for us to step out of these behaviors when they feel like we are separated from them and they're just happening to us. It's a lot easier for us to take seriously a claim on our identity, right? It's easier for me to say to someone, you lied, for them to take that. Say, hey, you lied to me. That might be easy because they could go, well, this is the reason I had to do that. It's harder for me if I call somebody a liar. You are a liar. And as we separate the people from their behavior, we start to sometimes get into a weaker form of love in speaking to how someone's consistent character and behavior does contribute to their identity and what they believe in and what they trust. Everybody acts out of their beliefs. There are some people, and I do not have the clinical background to talk about the psychology piece and what the physical things going on in the brain might be doing to help someone or hurt someone in getting out of a cycle. The second one with the gospel is the confrontation of the gospel, the real true gospel that sets us free, is something that really starts to work in the heart over time. And with both of those as an answer, saying it depends on who the person is, right? I think we have to also remember, we see Karen's pregnancy through the movie. My wife was very quick to mention that. The town is doing this for months. For months, they are going along with this for him. And that is another sort of love confrontation with gospel, of people making a sacrifice for you to be made whole and for you to come to a realization of the love that's coming around you. It's a different version. It's not the gospel. It's not the good news, but it is a version that is presented. And that confrontation that Karen brings to him is something that is really sits with him. So those are the two answers, and the general, it depends. But
Yeah.
a real question of your identity and consistent question of the identity and consistent confrontation with the gospel, both in the love they're shown and the actual gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And that's hard. And corporately, we have to I think we still have to figure that out.
Yeah.
Of what that looks like in every situation. But those are the two things that have really helped me when I'm struggling, when I've seen help others, and think might still do it. How about you?
I 100% agree with those two. I think the other thing coming to my mind as well is it was in a book I read, actually it was suggested through Forgiven in 3, called Unwanted. And that was a really life-changing book to read. And the thing that I would also offer is not being afraid to, so to Femi's answers, if you're struggling with the core gospel message that Christ died for your sins in the midst of your sins, that, he's already paid everything that needs to be paid. And so you are now free to choose. That means what you're doing is to some extent a choice. Now, with that, there are life experiences that you probably are not even aware of how deeply they impacted you and affected you. So for me, in my struggle, what I've learned is for many, many, many years, I've not been okay with who I am. Being more creative, being more emotional, being more outgoing in certain situations, like being diagnosed with OCD. There's been things that were hard for me to accept, that this is just kind of how I'm wired. And so in that shame, I think there was a lot of drive to, go to things like pornography to escape feeling like, well, I don't feel comfortable as who I am. And it's not because I like that thing. It's because that's the thing, It could have been heroin. It could have been something that just numbed me because it was like, I just don't want to feel anything because I don't want to be me and I don't want to be in my brain and in my body because I don't like it and I don't like who I am. So that's one thing, is just like when David, I think it's Psalm 100 something, but David says ask God, like, search my heart, O Lord, and like know my anxious thoughts. And I think to me, that message of, if you feel like, okay, I am coming from a Christian background and I've heard the message, the gospel should be enough to like help. The deeper layer of that is asking and seeking the power of the Holy Spirit through prayer, through journaling, through counseling, through conversation with trusted people in your life to dig out what is that thing deep down there.
Yeah.
And letting that thing then come to mind and being like, oh wow, like that's really not that crazy or whatever. It's just my teachers kind of made fun of me when I was a kid because I was emotional, or my friends made fun of me, or like this thing happened between my parents and I that wasn't super crazy traumatic, but it just stuck with me because that's the fallenness of our world, and like I have to kind of heal from that. And so just being willing to accept all the brokenness that you've probably absorbed across your life. And thinking of Lars as an example, I didn't even think of it until I was kind of prefacing my message, but Lars, we don't see it or hear it, but there's illusion that Lars's brother, when he got old enough, moved out of the house and just like dipped out.
Just left. Yeah.
And so I'm imagining what a emotionally damaged father who lost his wife because of the birth of this son that is now in his house would have treated him. And so we don't see that. We don't get told details, but I think in that darkness of imagination, you can imagine maybe he was emotionally distant, maybe he was abusive, maybe he was all these things. And so then if you take that and you rewind forward to then see, wow, it doesn't really surprise me that Lars would do something like this because he was so hurt by his identity as the person or the life that took his mother. And if that's what he heard from his dad, now he's replaying this out, and there's this like traumatic response in a way.
Yeah. I think I'll add on to that of part of knowing a person more. And this is something I always feel sort of semi-biased as somebody who's an extroverted person and likes asking intrusive questions, or what people consider intrusive questions. I think that you have to ask questions to know a person. And sometimes we don't know the answers to those questions. It doesn't mean there's not an answer. If you have a favorite color, definitely have debates with people about this all the time. There's probably a reason. Even if you forgot it, if you don't remember it, you like green because when you were 3, you were out in the middle of a field and it was the most fun day and it stuck in your memory and you don't remember it or whatever. But it draws you to something, or it represents something. It is symbolic for something. And not all of us have those answers right at the tip of our tongues. And sometimes we don't make space in our quest for productivity to actually figure out those answers, those questions to some of the things you're bringing up about people's past with drugs, alcohol, pornography, parents, and in-law relationships, whatever the thing may be. And so we just walk on by over and over and over with each other. And it makes it harder for us to question people, like, honestly, like, hey, who are you? Like, what is your actual identity? What are you putting your identity in that's false? And like, what do you actually believe about your identity? And then it makes it harder to even talk about the gospel effectively, because we're sort of twisting all these things without ever asking the questions and ever taking the time. And I think we're supposed to take that time.
As you're saying that, the image that came to mind is, I feel like the gospel is an ointment, which is necessary. But if you put it on an infection that's buried really deep, it's not going to have the impact that it needs to. And so another part to me of Christian spiritual discipline and sanctification is actually seeking out experts or people to help you dig down to the infection and to bring it to the surface or open it up so that when that ointment hits it, it actually does what it's supposed to do. Because I think of me, like, even in the last few years, like, I've still, battled struggles with pornography and stuff like that. But I've found and I've noticed that my struggles now versus my struggles when I was 16 are very, very, very different.
Yeah.
And the depths of how much the gospel and my identity and who I am wrapped up in other things, and then that just being an outlet, and then finally realizing and seeing that connection, and so having the awareness to dig deep, that's made the message of the gospel actually resonate, versus when I was 16 and they were like, just pray harder and you won't look at anything, and you're like, okay, like I'll just close my eyes wherever I go.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't really necessarily do the job.
Yeah, there are some people who I've been very impressed with who have been able to like just hold out, like be just white knuckle through things until the Holy Spirit's come on by. And almost every time as I meet them later, they're much more of an emotional person than they were in that sort of like white knuckle phase, because God has made them face something else. So it's been really cool to see. It's not a one size fits all thing, but it is different in community. So that leads me to sort of a second question around what's an example with Lars getting this, months on end sacrifice from an entire community that you have either experienced or entertained as a potential for something for your community to do in the local area.
Yeah.
What's something you have? So just anything you've seen, and listeners also to you, like thinking about what have you seen of like a group of people doing something?
Yeah. I mean, I shouldn't even say a small scale. I think something I got to participate, actually, you mentioned at the very top of the episode when COVID hit and just how much we saw about isolation and stuff like that. Something I did because I was furloughed, laid off. I don't remember. There was a whole bunch of terms flying around, but I spent my time, or I decided to help out at a food bank that was like delivering groceries to people. And one, you had not just me being a driver, taking it to the few houses I was assigned to take them to, but you had people orchestrating getting the food deliveries. You had people getting people's information to put it on bags and I think this was handled through a church down in Middleton or something. I can't remember the exact name of it or area, but you just were aware of all the components and all the people doing the smallest detail to get a week's worth of groceries to a family who needed it. And to me, I think the sacrifice of that community, and like I gave a little bit, like I gave my time. I could have just been sitting on the couch watching even more Great British Baking Show or whatever, but I gave up something. Other people were giving up their time. Other people were giving up their safety of their health. Other people were giving up space in their church basement to take in all this stuff. Like there was a lot of big and small sacrifices as a group. And so I think that is, to me, that's probably one of the most recent and potent examples of like just something that I got to be a part of that I was like, wow, like I honestly haven't thought about that experience in a long time. But I think there was something deep and profound about everyone pitching in, just even if it was a little bit.
I've seen them on short scales and never seen it something that long. But usually when there's a tragedy, unfortunately, is when a lot of resources sort of come around to people. But it's still a lot of volunteers. It's a lot of people who are taking of their own time, skills, resources, like you mentioned. And I think in the United States, a one that goes semi-neglected because of taxes is everybody who volunteers for the military, and not just so they can get free education, but just the size of the volunteer military force and people who re-up when they've served their term over and over and over again. I've seen some churches pay for school balances for school lunch debt because they have free or reduced lunch programs. And so the church will call and ask and say, how much is left? And we'll be like, we got like $6,000. We don't know where the money's going to come from. And the church will just write a check and then the school's back in the black. Part of that's probably going to be due to the size of the cities that I've lived in. None of them have been tiny. I think it's really cool for that sustained effort, like throughout Karen's almost entire pregnancy. It's really cool to see how many people just like pushed, So speaking of Karen, there were times where passion, there are times where passion of a person or a group of people, like the amount that they have, it just goes unnoticed. We say like, oh, those are people who are crazy over there. Those are people who are crazy over there. And not to demean the word crazy, forgive me, but making sure that we understand there are people who we just write off. Karen's passion for Lars was from the get-go. Like, I'm getting my brother-in-law to come out of his shell. And it was, in a way, was it too much or not hard enough? And who in your life has shared a passion for you in that way? And then what do you use as a barometer to say, like, hey, this person's coming on too strong, or that's not enough pressure. I need somebody to like really like get under me, get after me. And then is there somebody in your life that you feel that same sense of passion for?
Yeah, dude. This was a tough one to reconcile because that's something that I struggle with often, and I struggled with I think more my first year of teaching, but being in my third year, I've kind of come to a more healthy perspective. I think one thing that is very hard about being an educator is your whole job, and for a lot of people, their inspiration and their passion for the job is helping students succeed. That's what they're there for. I want to see the kid who doesn't think that they can do math. I want to see the kid who doesn't think they can write the most amazing poem or thing that they've ever written. At the same time, that is a mental battle that you have a very small percentage of control over. You have control over how you present the information. You have control over how you present yourself and how you show up to support when things are going wrong for them. But for them, they have to be the ones to choose to grow. They have to be the ones choosing to write and to do math and to do the project with their friends and not slack off in class or, play Angry Birds or whatever. It's probably not Angry Birds anymore. But that to me, I think has been one of the hardest things to accept is I could not. Actually, let me rewind back. It wasn't hard for me to not accept that. It was very easy to say, I'm not in control of them. They're adolescents. I was a kid at one point. I remember what it was like to people telling me what to do, and I wasn't about it. I think what was hard is not having this thought, because I've thought this a lot about myself in different scenarios of life, that there's something that I can do because I'm unique or special that I'm like, I'll be the one to crack it. I'll be the one to get this kid to do it. And so then there's this pressure that I put on myself that, well, what's wrong with you? You can't help them. You're not helping them. You're not doing enough to get them to figure this thing out about themselves or do this thing. Like, what's wrong with you? And then all of a sudden, what was supposed to be a selfless act of helping kids succeed and excel now becomes this very oppressive internal war about not living up to my own expectations. So I think to me, when I watched Karen, it's the imbalance of humanity, right? Like, she has such a deep love and care for Lars that she's like, I want to see him well. I want him to succeed. I want him to have a healthy life and healthy relationships. But also, like, Lars isn't down for it. And there's things that because of Karen's forcefulness that she probably made worse in Lars's life because she didn't know him deeply enough to understand his boundaries and his struggles, even with like the scene where she tackles him in the snow when he's like trying to get back into his house, and then the later revelation that he doesn't like to be touched or hugged or whatever, and just thinking how uncomfortable that probably was for him and how upset that may have made him. And even further, it isn't until Lars orders the doll that then there is now finally a door for Karen and for Gus and the town to actually help and to step in. Yeah. So it had to be Lars's initiative to do something that warranted stepping in and allowed kind of like a gateway in a sense.
Yeah. He uses it as his proxy to communicate.
Yeah.
And the town is like, oh, if that's the proxy, then we're using it too. Yeah, I felt that it's hard to pinpoint at different points in time when someone has been that supportive for me, because when you need that support, I believe that most of us are not, like Lars, fully aware that we need that support. Most of the time, it's probably from our parents when we're young. We do not understand how much loving and caring parents really believe and hope for the best for you when you're growing up. You just cannot understand how much they want you to be happy, successful, and safe. And because of that, like, it's hard, especially if you start to have an inability to communicate with them. It's hard to communicate back with them of like, hey, I'm different now. Hey, I'm different now. Hey, I'm different now. Like, as those changes are coming. And then different coaches. And for me, I played piano a little bit when I was growing up. playing piano, there were some times that my piano teachers were too soft on me. And I was like, I know I could do it better, but since you're only going to go this hard on me, this is how much you're going to get next week. In my laziness. And coaches who were hard unnecessarily because they saw other coaches be hard, where I was like, look, I literally just gave you everything. I don't have any more. Like, or I need like an hour to go practice this thing. Like, I can't do it better the next time. If you make me run sprints, I'll be running sprints all practice, and I will know that you don't hear when I'm like, hey, like, this is not something my mind body connection's gonna do. And that might not mean I'm a pro athlete, like I'm not, but realizing that difference is something that I've been trying to be better at, of who is really in my corner, who I can tell you got to push me, and who I'm like, hey, like, I get it, like, back up, I got it, thank you. There are other things that are coming into play here that you need to be aware of. For me, the person who I'm probably the biggest supporter of right now, like, I got some toddlers, but my wife is probably the biggest one who I want to see fully come into whatever God wants her to be. Not only because part of it's selfish, because if she is that, then she will be the best, like, advocate for me and helper for me. But part of it is just so she feels free from some of the things in her past. And feeling that freedom and that weight lifted is something that is scary for her. And I feel the same sort of pressure of, like, am I being a good enough husband if I'm not removing that load from her? If I can't take that load, if she's doesn't know which load she wants to take or not, or direction she wants to go, because she's never seen the other side of this type of thing, then how do I do that effectively when she believes all the same things I believe about who God is and his ability to give us freedom? She just hasn't experienced some of those in the same way or at the same levels. And so that motivation to be there or not, like, it's not, like, as a spouse, I think it's really hard to know what is my role, because you're not a therapist. The spouse is not a therapist. So thinking through that, those are some things I think about.
Yeah, dude, that's good. And I echo that. Same thing for me. Gloria has been probably one of the main reasons or people that has influenced my life. I would say she's probably been the biggest influence in my life. And she's the reason I would honestly, I mean, there's a whole slew of very real, very life stories that we could talk about, but she's a big reason. God has used her to keep me here and to keep me alive. And so there is an awareness where I've seen her live out kind of what this the town does, in a sense, where she went along with a lot of crap and a lot of stuff where, you know, when I decided I can't take this corporate job anymore and I'm going to be an author, and then, you know, COVID hit, and then I had to be a freelancer, and I was stressed for 2.5 years straight and, you know, anxiety through the roof. And she put up with a lot of that. So I think, interestingly for me now I feel I've seen God work miraculously through prayer and journaling and devotion time and his word and counseling, deeper relationships and friendships. And now I kind of want the same thing for her, but I also can't force her to do any of that. And so there's like it's hard to want to love someone so much you want the best for them, but to know that it's each person's choice to an extent.
Yeah, if anybody's like wondering why aren't we putting out like an episode a week, is because we do care about these women in our lives
very deeply. Yep.
And are trying to be very, very cognizant that they're being brought along in the journey with us, and we're not like steamrolling them in any way. So
definitely.
And part of that reason is last question before we get into sort of the end. Again, trying to watch time on episodes is one of the things we're both trying to get better at. And there's nobody yelling at us; we're just yelling at ourselves. Is the community sort of goes along with a lie. So some people don't like the idea that you buy into a lie. You mentioned at the church meeting they had in a movie, someone's like, this is not that big of a deal compared to some of the other things we got going on. Just like, let the kind guy who's quiet and doesn't bother anybody just believe the delusion. I do consider it a, like, by the letter of the law, a lie, but not by the spirit of the law, a lie. And so is the community lying is the question. Yeah. You know, we can't consider Lars technically lying, because if he's delusional, he does not know that it's a lie. But what makes this type of thing good or bad, like this type of lie or these lies that are letter versus spirit things, good or bad.
So shout out to my wife who pointed this out, that one of her favorite scenes or moments is there's a scene as Lars starts to dissociate from Bianca, and you see he's kind of getting angry at her, and he's kind of having these weird spats. There's this really interesting moment where he asks for some privacy at home where he's staying with Gus and his wife, and he starts yelling at the doll. And so when he goes outside, or he takes her to the car with one of the other church women who knows him, she kind of reads them the riot act, being like, you don't talk to her that way. Like, that's not how you treat someone. And so it's a great scene, but to me, it's super profound, because I would agree that I think at the core, yes, this is a lie. And I wrote in my little note to myself with this answer. I don't know any real therapists that would probably tell a whole town to go along with someone's delusion as an actual form of therapy. Maybe it's out there. Maybe it would work. I don't know. But I think for the sake of the message of the movie, in going along with the delusion, they're not doing it to... How do I frame it? I think I'd just kind of had a realization, because I've literally had something like this kind of happen with my students before, where you kind of let them do something that you know is wrong, so that when you watch them reap the consequences, you can kind of be like, okay, come here. You know why I let you do that? Yeah. Because now you see this is what happens. And so to me, the interesting part is you have this woman yelling at Lars for you don't talk to her like that. That's not how you treat your lady or whatever. And so even though it's a doll and there's all this stuff, she's still holding a very God-honoring standard of how Lars should speak to someone, whether it's fake or real. And so to me, I think I would 100% agree that it's a hard tension. But I think for the sake of an example, there's kind of the town, I didn't even think of it this way. The town almost becomes a parent in a way, where they're letting Lars live his life and make his decisions, but they're also holding him accountable in small increments so that he gets it eventually. So in that moment when he starts doing something that's not okay, because it was fine when he's being cute at the the dinner party or whatever, and they're just sitting in the corner, but then when he's yelling at her, that's not cool. That's you don't do that. And so I don't know, it's an interesting example, but I'd love to hear from you, having two young children at home. What is that like? How do you see this imagery and this metaphor playing out?
I think what you said with parenting, it is a truth that good parents tell partial truths all the time to their kids to help teach them bigger and more complex truths later. One of the things that's hard for me to say, honestly, is I'll be right back, right? I don't know. When I go to work, especially if I go to work before my kids wake up, I don't know if I'm going to come back. But if I have to say bye to them and they're like, don't go. One of the hardest things for me to do is for a while it was to say, I'll be back, because I have to drive half an hour to work, and anything can happen to that drive. And I've gotten in a car accident where something hit my car, and God worked his own magic through that. But it's hard, man. I think a lie spiritually also has malice and redirection intent for some type of selfish purpose.
Sure.
In terms of bearing false witness, right? Which is slightly different from I'm trying to help a person understand a basic truth, which we do with Sunday school all the time with kids. We say God is love a lot, or that God loves you. We don't talk about how complex love is, or the minor prophets, and how God just reads them a riot act. I'm like, guys, you are acting like bleep, 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 bleep to me after all the things I've done for you. But that's still a loving God. It's not, it's weird for a kid to try to hold those two things in tension, which is why some parents are pro discipline and active discipline and even physical discipline. And some parents are like, I can't do that because I feel like it's confusing my kid if I do this and then tell them I love them. And that feels weird. I'm like, yeah, also your company tells you they love you, treat you like family, but they will fire you if they need to. It's both are sort of true. It's weird, the complexity. So I think it's complex. In this situation, I think it is by the letter of the law a lie, by the spirit of the law not a lie. It's enabling a lie that Lars is actually telling by accident, but he's not trying to be malicious. Again, he's not trying to abuse other people. He's really just needs that help. So, yeah, it's a complex thing that we have to think through with toddlers all the time. How much do we tell them? How much do we expose? And if you are, again, a listener who's thinking about media exposure with kids, we're going to be coming up with some content to sort of think through some good questions, but we'll let you know how that goes.
Absolutely.
Any other questions you got in a little bit? Otherwise, we'll get into some of our passages.
No, man, I'm good.
All right. Let's get into some of our lightly called theology. So we call this section theology. Christians, we try to make sure that we're not just using our thoughts, but we're comparing them to the stories that are supposed to communicate truth and where we lean on the Bible. A couple passages that come to mind when I think of Lars and the Real Girl were bearing the burdens of each other. That's in Galatians 6. You can read verses 2 through 10. And to not be deceived. So let's get into that lying point again. In Deuteronomy 10 and through the Old Testament, if you actually look at the laws that the Israelites were given, a lot of them are about being kind to foreigners, specifically because the Israelites were held as captors in Egypt for so long, as captives, excuse me, in Egypt for so long, and were not treated well as foreigners in a foreign land. The switch of that, where we see Moses, even with the Midianites, when he's in the wilderness, he feels so isolated as he's not of them, but becomes enveloped in their community. He still remembers that he's a Hebrew, an Egyptian and a Hebrew, this weird foreign feeling. And God tells people over and over again to treat the foreigner, treat the alien kindly, because we know what it's like not to be treated well. I think that's a really good reminder, because that's pre-Jesus showing up on the scene, as we think about all of Jesus' commands as well. And then Romans 14, do not destroy the work of God for the sake of food. Our goals when we have these debates about certain things of what we should do, as we see in that church basement and how people heal things, is we're here for the mutual edification. And in the movie, we see how everybody got better, it seems, by the end, by making the sacrifice, this huge corporate sacrifice over time. They were closer connected. We bear with the weak around us so that all of us can be edified. So I don't know if that's something going on in your church, whether it's about how to talk about things going on in the Middle East. Again, we're in end of year 2023, and a lot of people are nervous and don't know how to interpret things. And some people have never, ever been to the Middle East or are old enough to understand some of the intricacies of the situations. It's really hard to get people who have different thoughts on what they should do about that compared to building a new building or starting a new ministry or helping with childcare or just getting more volunteers or their personal evangelism. What is the most important thing? Bear with those who are weak for the edification of all, and thinking about that in small local communities or even in your family. So those are passages that I think through and interpret and see connected, that God is speaking truth into this fictional story.
Yeah.
So what are some passages or things you think of?
Well, I had just one main passage, which is Proverbs 3:27. So do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to do it. So I think classic proverb, just small and punchy, but at the heart of it, the townspeople all had these little things that they could do. And how would we have had a very different movie if they had said, no, I'm not doing that. Or, no, I could give this weird doll a haircut, and take me like 10 minutes, but like, no, I'm not gonna do that. And so you and I have talked a lot in the past about not getting caught up in the big mission all the time about changing the world. And sometimes it's the small thing you can do. It's the being kind to the person, who's checking out your groceries and just having a little funny conversation with them for 2 minutes while you're paying. Sometimes it is giving money to someone or extending yourself, but it's the small mundane acts of love that will often over time do the greatest work.
This episode was produced by Josh Erickson, Josh Cook, and Femi Shokoya, and edited by Josh Erickson. Our social media producer is Colton Mefford. We are currently self-supported. You can check out short stories, merch, and highlighted creators at parablearrows.com. You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok at Parable Arrows, or support us on Patreon. Thank you for listening to the Parable Arrows podcast. Think, move in faithfulness, and trust God. Pull back, aim high, let it fly.